Welcome to the Business Herald podcast. The Business Herald is a weekly roundup of all of the top UK business news stories by email, social media, and this podcast. The podcast will feature some of the week's main stories, and we'll be joined by various business people on each episode to discuss the week's news and how it might impact a smaller business like yours. And hopefully we'll have some fun on a Friday too. I'm your host, Stephen Mather. I'm a lawyer for SMEs, and I help business owners sleep better at night by sorting their legal problems out. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Business Herald. So welcome along to episode 26 of the Business Herald podcast. It's Friday, the 26th of February, 2021. This week saw Boris's roadmap to freedom announced, the moment we've all been waiting for. The 21st of June is the target date for all restrictions to be removed. Boris called them irreversible, but not in a guaranteed irreversible, usual everyday meaning of the word. No, that's not the government's way. It's just that the intention is that they're going to be irreversible. But, you know, they follow data, not dates is the new phrase, which ironically is what every single person has said over the last 12 months as well. Next Wednesday sees the Chancellor Rishi Sunak's budget, and so this week, almost every day saw someone or some think tank comment on what he should and shouldn't do. We had previous chancellors saying it was, quote, too early to try to balance the books. That was Alistair Darling. And another one saying that the government need to, quote, tell some difficult home truths and say that the hard times are coming. Philip Hammond, even David Cameron, do you remember him? He had, how come he still gets an opinion on anything? I'm not quite sure. But he piped up and said, treat it like a wartime debt and pay it back over many years so not to damage the economic recovery. So we'll talk about that as well. Meanwhile, we've seen lots of big companies announce results with loss after loss after loss announced. And each time I see such a story, I pull out yet another tiny violin for them. I mean, Gordon Ramsay, bless him, he told us this week that his restaurants are down £60 million in revenue. And said this, he said, lockdowns have caused utter devastation, having been through so much with the 2008 financial crash, then terrorist attacks and 9/11. When COVID first hit, we all thought it'd be over and done within a couple of weeks, but it's been a long haul. Absolutely has. And finally, the head of Goldman Sachs, my favorite story of the week, head of Goldman Sachs came out and said that working from home as a model was an aberration and needed to be corrected as soon as they can. And they'll insist on bums on seats. The general consensus over on my LinkedIn post was that working from home should be a choice and not insisted upon. So on today's show, I am joined by Graham David and Paul Green. Graham David is a speaker and corporate trainer who owns 3 training companies. His main business, established in 1996, is an award-winning management training company which is delivered all over the UK, Europe and further afield. Over the last 12 months, he's acquired 2 new companies and is actively seeking his next one. He only uses 2 social media platforms, LinkedIn and TikTok, where he's now famous. And he shares his ideas, experiences, and views about business, learning and development, and the events of the day. Paul Green, not so much a fan of TikTok, has been a business owner since 2003 and now runs the Business Community, a group based on collaboration and support with around 140 members, all looking to grow their business and help others do the same. He's worked with hundreds of business owners, providing business advice and coaching. So welcome along to both of you. So, Graham, I'll come along to you first. What did you make of Boris's roadmap? Slow and steady wins the race, or should the economy and mental health take priority now, given the number of vaccinations done in the vulnerable?
Well, I don't want to sound I don't want to sound like I'm being a little bit cynical here, but maybe I'm a little bit cynical. The problem we've got, of course, is that we've had announcement after announcement after announcement after announcement, and in a totally non-political way. I'm not sure which party or which leader may have done things better or differently or whatever else. I end up with all right, it's another announcement. There's our roadmap. Okay, but it's covered with so many caveats. There's more caveats here than a solicitor might give us, Stephen. And it's full of, well, we'll try and do this, but, and it's probably going to be this, but, and it'll be this depending. So I think purely personally, in a perhaps in a selfish perspective of this, I'm just going to keep on doing what I've been doing. The first 2 months of this whole lockdown, as you said a year ago, were pretty horrendous, as I suspect they have been for many, many people. I've got into a bit of a groove now. Everything I'm doing, I'm delivering online. So I'm just sort of getting on with it. And if we get to go out a bit more, if we get to see some friends and family, if we get to shudder, go into pubs or restaurants, brilliant. But I'm not going to hold my breath about it.
I think that's right. I think even just for him to say it's irreversible, but I mean, not really irreversible, but kind of irreversible. It was just demonstrates exactly like we've lost, which is a shame. And this is a political point that you weren't making, but I'm making. We've kind of lost trust in the government's announcements, because every time they make an announcement about it, feet get pulled under the rug, and we're in a different place.
There's a bit of truth in that. I think also, without raking over the Dominic Cummings affair, or and he wasn't the only person to have done this. There's been a large number of people, quite high-profile people, often people who have a degree of power or authority, who have quite clearly broken some rules. And the difficulty then, of course, is, well, are we following these rules or are we not going to follow these rules? Because frankly, nobody really seems to know. And I think that's been the difficulty. And as you say, everything has been set up as, yes, we're going to do it, and no, we're not. And look at even sort of schools back, schools not back. Yep, schools are going to be back. No, they're not going to be back. It's been like that throughout. And I think you're right. We've absolutely lost some level of they have lost some level of credibility, perhaps.
Well, what do you think to the roadmap? Do you think it's right to still, negative word, drag things out until June for some businesses to get back to normal?
I mean, as frustrating as it is, it's, we're in uncertain territory, aren't we? No one really knows what the virus is going to do, how it's going to evolve, whether the vaccine is going to be resistant to different strains of the virus and things like that. My frustration as we're in, lockdown 3.0, if that's what's being called, is I think most people are probably more frustrated this time around than they were with the last two, because, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is one definition of insanity, or getting the same result as the definition of sanity. So I think if this is extended, if it takes longer, but it means we never go into lockdown situation again, then I'm quite happy for that to be the case. But we've got to get to a point where we've got to live with this thing, and we've got to take the consequences of people dying if they get infected, because, we can't continue to go down this road as we are, of being, imprisoned in our own homes with very little to do, and the massive impact it's having on certain businesses, and the debt is increasing as the government tries to support these businesses. You can't give a handout to everybody, and to use the phrase for this podcast, kicking the can down the road. That money has got to be recovered at some point. So will it be as it's mapped out at the moment? I don't know. If they're looking at the data this time and taking action accordingly, then that's got to be a good thing. As more and more people get vaccinated, that's got to be a good thing as well. So hopefully, we are getting nearer and nearer to living as normal life as possible, with the fact the virus isn't going to go anywhere. It's still going to be there. So, we've got to bite the bullet at some point and just hope that the vaccine is enough to save lives.
Earlier this week, I interviewed Paul Scully, MP, and who has responsibility for small businesses. And there's another podcast going out today as well. So I have two podcasts this week. So if you're listening to this podcast, listen to the other podcast as well, the interview with Paul Scully. But in that, he said this, as the Prime Minister described it, that most businesses will hopefully accept the trade-off between haste and certainty. What we've tried to do with the roadmap, and the discussions that he's had, is to try and make it irreversible, so that they don't go back to stop and start that they had last time, which in itself was damaging for a number of businesses in various sectors. Of course, he then went on to say, look, actually, the roadmap is only part one of the jigsaw puzzle. Part two is the budget. And that further support that all small businesses are hoping for, seeing that they can't open, right now, and there's a lot of businesses that are really struggling. I posed the question to him. I posed the question to you: is that those businesses that are having to wait until June, hospitality being the main one, of those businesses, how many are actually going to be able to wait until June? Like, if they've not already closed, permanently, indefinitely, doing something else, how many of them can sit and wait, to hold on? I don't know, Graham. You're nodding. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the whole thing is I'm just mindful of your comments not to swear at this stage, a show, isn't it? And the difficult thing is this, that the longer that we get everybody or a number of people very comfortable with the very generous hand of our own money, the harder it is to move off from there and to wean off from there. And I think linked with that, purely personally, I'm looking at the potentials for what might be, what taxes we raise or how we raise tax and so on. Of course, the jargon, the language is always going to be the same. It always is. Those who have the broader shoulders should be asked to pay just a little bit more. And this is always the language they use. Doesn't matter what politician's going to trot it out. They always say it. And I think what's going to feel especially unfair this time, and I think it's really key with some of these companies that have had a lot of support, and those companies getting support was probably a good idea. It probably made a lot of sense, but we're going to have a situation where there's an enormous number of companies that have had at huge public cost support, who, as you say, have possibly already closed, have possibly moved their business model, possibly are never going to open again. We're also going to then have, how do we pay for it all? And a number of people asked to pay for it are going to be people who have had zero support. And we end up in a really messy and I suspect rather divisive situation. You mentioned TikTok earlier on. Whenever I've raised this question, who should pay for all of this? How do we pay for all this? What companies need support? The amount of 2, 3, 4 different directions that people are trying to pull this same conversation into, I think is a small microcosm of what's probably going to happen pending however we move forward from this. But you're right, so many companies that have been, people have been paid on furlough. Look at all the retail businesses that have closed. They were always going to close. Of course they were going to close. Pre-pandemic they were going to close. And it's not the single fault of an online retailer, it's not the fault of a pandemic, it's not the fault of rates, it's a whole combination of things, and the pandemic's just sped it all up. So if we're going to be harsh about it, why have we continued to pay for some businesses that aren't going to survive?
I asked the question, I'll ask it to you guys as well, which is this: should those businesses that haven't had that support actually be taxed as much as the businesses that have had the support? Now, the MP's answer to that, Graham, as you said, which was we have a progressive tax regime, and therefore the more you earn, the more you'll pay tax. It's percentage based, and so like if you've struggled, then you won't pay as much tax this year. But the point is actually, should there be a super tax? To use a monopoly word, a super tax on top of earnings for those companies that have benefited from getting the furlough money from grant money, or is that sign of giving with one hand and taking with the other? Either way, I think we all realize and we all know, because we've been fed it for the last 6 months, that someone's going to have to pay for that, and that's us. But yeah, it's going to be a difficult one next week for Rishi to work out which way to go, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's difficult, isn't it? There's no answer, there's no equitable solution, as there's been no equitable fair solution in terms of who's got a handout and who hasn't. How you take that forward. So, like you said, in a fair world, I guess those people that didn't get support this time round, should get some sort of easing up going forward, because they're not in the same boat as everybody else. Hospitality and business to consumer businesses, I feel for, particularly when I look at some of the restaurants and pubs and clubs who invested all the money that they did to make the places safe. They put plastic screens in, PPE'd themselves up, and then were asked to close down again. It just seems so inappropriate. Could we have managed that better and still have those places be open? Because I don't know whether there's any data that says that's where people were getting the virus. It might be if you're in a packed club or pub in London, sort of shoulder to shoulder. But those restaurants and clubs that balanced it, that rearranged their tables, that put screens up, that they could have stayed open, I think, and that would have been good for people. It would have been some revenue coming in for them and the economy, and it wouldn't have had people feel so imprisoned, as I said earlier, in their homes. I'm yearning for a pint in a pub, just to get out there and just do something that's different.
Right.
I'm just listening, nodding away to Paul there. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think, we've got let's eat out to help out, was it? We liked our slogans over this last year, didn't we? Hands, face, space, and bumps a daisy, whatever it was. All of these things that have been trotted out because we need it spoon fed to us, because otherwise the great British public doesn't understand.
Yeah.
Although interestingly, the police apparently still don't understand. Only 10% of them actually were able to understand the rules and laws that the rest of us were getting out 70,000 tickets for over the last year, I think I read recently. So that's all reasonable then. I think throughout this, the lack of planning, and we might be able to look back and in retrospect have perfect vision, of course. And I don't envy the people who've had to make some decisions here. But I think you're right, Paul. I think the amount of mixed messages and the flip-flopping between let's get everybody to go out and we'll incentivize, we'll pay people to go out and eat, then actually, no, we're going to close it all again, makes no rational sense whatsoever. I mean, it was always going to go badly, I think. And your other comment there, Stephen, the sort of the idea of the super tax, those who have done well or those who have perhaps been some level of support, that's the most consistent comment I've seen on posts I've done. If you had some level of support from the government, why not, whether it's a company or even an individual, have some long-term plan, which could be 5, 10, 20, 30 years to repay it. Now that might feel a lot fairer than the inevitable, we're all in this together, because we're not all in this together. There's something like 3 million people, small businesses. And again, it's very easy to go sort of depersonalize this. It's big corporates, right? It's the big corporates, it's the faceless companies. They're making millions. They should be taxed. Well, let's remember a couple of things. Most people in this country are employed by really, really small companies, 1 or 2 people. Many of us who own limited companies pay ourselves via a dividend arrangement. That, of course, always raises the hackles of some, you weren't paying tax. Well, we were just paying different tax. That's all that is. And then if we're talking about 19 to 25% tax increase, there's just no real rational thought behind that, as far as I can see. And I think B, more importantly, it seems to be forgetting the key idea behind tax, which is pretty much it's always the consumer that ends up paying it. It doesn't matter. You do whatever you want to do to the big companies, they're going to pass the cost on. So we're all going to end up paying it anyway.
And for me, actually, it's looking at it from those 3 or 4 million people that have been, excluded. So they're going, hang on a minute, I've had the worst year that I've possibly had, right? I've scrimped and scraped, I tried to get what I could do, or I wasn't allowed to work in some industries, not had any support because I was too new. Like me, for instance, I set up my business in January. Didn't have the payroll, so can't furlough, can't do anything, not able to have any kind of grants. You then ask those 3 million people to pay a bit more tax, if you don't mind. We're all in this together. Just pay, it's okay. We'll just increase it slightly every year for the next 5 years, and it's a way to pay everything back. That is going to feel really difficult. That is properly rubbing salt into a wound.
It really is. And for the record, anybody who is self-employed who got the grant, I think that's brilliant. I think it really, really helps. A lot of people didn't. If you own a small limited company and you pay yourself via salary and you're able to put yourself on furlough, brilliant. I'm really genuinely happy. All the people that are PAYE that got furloughed, that's fantastic. I really applaud all of those strategies. I think they were brilliant. But then when you look at the people you've just identified there, Stephen, it's 3 million people possibly that got no support. The argument is always back, well, you could apply for a loan. Well, loans need repaying. Well, you got to defer your VAT. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to defer my VAT, which is always going to have to be paid, because there's one group of people you don't upset, it's the VAT people. And then what's going to happen a year from now, when you've got reduced income, you're still going to have to pay that same amount of money. So the defer VAT was an utterly pointless, ridiculous, zero benefit, frankly. If if you've got any money in that isn't yours because it's VAT money, you're going to have to pay it. So you have to pay it and move on with it. There was no way that was a smart move. And you're right, that's going to feel very, very, very tough if that 3 million people, a little bit more tax for you just to make it fair.
So moving on to talking about the budget, moving on. So as I said in the intro, chancellors, think tanks, everybody's had an opinion on what the chancellor should and shouldn't do. So why shouldn't we have the same right to have an opinion? I think we should. So obviously, Alistair Darling said it was too early to try and balance the books. That shouldn't be the approach. But Philip Hammond, the previous Conservative chancellor, who resigned because he said he didn't want to work with Boris Johnson, if you remember, said that actually it's time for the government to tell some difficult home truths and tell the public that some hard times are going to come. He was the guy that kind of, took us through austerity, and which I don't think I've met anybody that actually liked, but, got the debt down. So, Paul, what do you think, what would you do if you're the chancellor, without any of the data, just a wild opinion, basically? But what would you do if you were the chancellor? What things are you going to bring in?
I think it is too early to start balancing the books. We're still in this situation. So I don't think anybody really wants any more bad news, do they? But having said that, there needs to be a balance of, honesty and, where is this money going to come back from? But yeah, I think it doesn't need to be anything that's too harsh, does it, this time round? I appreciate that things are going to have to shift as they always do in a budget, but hopefully there's going to be good news for, any good news for those 3 million small businesses that didn't get anything this time round. If there's anything that can be done for them, I don't know what, I'm not an economist. I don't know what the options are, to be honest with you. But if there is something that can be done to recognise them, whether it's up in their threshold on what they pay tax or the VAT threshold, whatever it might be, just doing something like that so they get a little bit of a break and, aren't all of a sudden being taxed straight away. So I don't know, it's a tricky one, Stephen. As I said, I'm not an economist. I don't know what the answer is and what I would do. I just hope that they're not going to start hitting us with taxes all over the place to start to recover the money now.
Graham, what do you think?
I'll get a free hand on this, right? Okay, so cuts the tax code by at least half. It was already the most complicated tax code, I think, pretty much in the world, bar a few places. And then Gordon Brown came along, got his messy little fingers all over it and doubled tax code in 10 years. And one of the problems is people keep trotting out, close the loopholes so that we can get all this tax from the billionaires will pay, the online retailers will pay. Right. Here's what I think we ought to be doing. I think we should be getting out of the way of all of this. So how about this? Let's cut corporation tax to 15%. Let's cut it to 15%. And let's get back on board with reducing it to 10% or something ridiculous like that. Let's get rid of all these top levels of tax or all these other things. Let's just reduce all that, because we've got a couple of other issues as well. There's that whole Brexit thing, which most of us have forgotten about because that was another show that was going through this whole process. So we need to attract some other interest and some other investment and some other people to base their operations in the UK. So whereas we're talking about, we'll go to 24%, 25%, it will still be below America, because if they're going to raise it to 27 or 28, and maybe we'll be one of the lowest G7 still, let's ditch all that. Let's actually do the opposite. Let's reduce the tax. Let's stop tinkering and messing around with the edges, because part of the problem we've got at the moment is government keeps getting in the way, and it keeps getting in the way, and it's virtually impossible for any of us to do business. So if we're going to do that, let's also think about the high street, right? So at the moment, partly forced, of course, by the pandemic, but it's been happening for years. Oh, it's Amazon's fault. It's all these deliveries. It's the retailer's fault. Oh, it's the council's fault. All government, council, they all want their little piece of the pie. So I don't know, less pie, right? We got to be a little bit bold about this. We're going to have to redesign our city centres. We're going to have to redesign our high streets. We probably still want somewhere to go, but we probably want a bit of a mix. We don't want to make the mistake of the 1960s with all the tower blocks and the, we've got these brilliant housing areas, which sort of 20 years later have become, in some cases, quite rough areas. We need to get into this mixed use. So clearly people are still going to want to go and have their special cup of coffee or their select cheese items from a small delicatessen. But let's stop pretending. I don't really want to go into shops. I don't want to trail around the car park. I don't want to then go and find the shop and queue to get in and queue to find a member of staff to be told, oh, well, if it's not on the shelf, we haven't got it. I want to click my phone like everybody else and have it arrive at my front door the next day. That'll suit me. But the little individual items, yes, I still want to do that. And we've got to move all of this thing that government, this massive, great machine that government and council yearns to be. They want to be at the center of everything, controlling everything, charging for everything. I want to get them out of the way. I want them to charge a lot less. I want a bit of a reset on all of these. And I'd like a reinvention of these city centres. I mean, just as a sort of a final thought on that strand, I guess, there was news this week, the landlords of London for the big retail, the big offices, government should encourage people back into the workspaces.
Yeah.
But as you said, Stephen, people don't want to go back into it. You know, the genie's out of the bottle. People have experienced working from home now. And do you know what? It's quite good for all disadvantages. So with my free hands, reduce corporation tax, simplify the tax code, reduce it everywhere, and encourage some free thinking enterprise. That's what I'd like to do.
I agree on no, it's all good. I agree on the tax front. One of the, like you say, the allegation is that if only all of these big companies paid their tax, right? Okay. The only reason why they don't pay their tax here, it's because it's cheaper somewhere else. So let's keep them here. Let's make it worthwhile them investing here rather than going to Netherlands or to Ireland, the two main countries, you know, in the European zone. Rather than make them attractive places for them to divert their money to, let's make it the UK. Let's make it, you know, us so that we get the tax out of it, because we're much better off getting 10 or 15% tax on, you know, $1 billion that's transferred out than getting none of it. And so it seems to make sense that is an appropriate option. It was you mentioned the kind of 10%. That was a target, wasn't it, of Osborne? I think it was to get it down to there, and it started to come down. But now to talk about increasing it, I think it's madness. And I think, like you say, linked with Brexit, where everybody is already going, okay, we're going to go back to Europe because it's easier for us to do trade. Well, make it worthwhile them to invest here and go, do you know what? We can see there's some difficulties with us trading with Europe, but we're able to overcome that because it's lower tax rates here. It's easier to do work here, and there's less paperwork.
I'm in the post-Brexit world. You know, that's what we need to do. We need to make us, now we're, you know, literally an isolated island, you know, attractive to the world, for them to want to come and bring their business to our country and, you know, create jobs. So yeah, that needs looking at, doesn't it? You know, what can we do to incentivize these big corporates to, you know, base their headquarters in the UK?
Yeah. Well, and building on from that, you know, we're also thinking, Paul, that you've got the big corporates. Let's sort of get them. Let's if it's going to be a bit of a hassle, if it's going to be an extra cost or difficulty because we need to trade because of the isolated position now, all right. If that's the difficulty, which will incur extra cost, however, the tax rate is so attractive, brilliant, it's still a winner. But also, this is great for small businesses because so many people are trying to set up a side hustle these days. It's what it's called, isn't it? A side hustle or a small business or an extra source of income. That the whole idea of freelance working is really taken off in the last few years. And the more we can do to encourage that, the less you have people trying to think, well, I feel like I'm being stiffed at every turn at the moment by the government. Well, actually, why don't we make it a really good incentive? That's the percentage you've got to pay of your earnings. Well, cool, I don't mind doing that. At the moment, there are so many levels of difficulty and confusion, and the government's, you know, you're always there with its hand out, I need a bit more, please. No, terrible idea. Let's reduce it and make it easier for people to start a business and start creating revenue.
And I think that's right. The stats, Companies House stats, show that more companies have been created in the last 12 months than the previous ones, which is really good. And there's a lot of businesses where the SIC code is like online retailing and that kind of brilliant, absolutely fantastic. But I can almost assure people that if the tax rate on company tax was 25% and then dividend tax was increased to 35%, and people are looking at that going, hang on a minute, so I'm paying 60%. Why would I? No, why? Why would I do that for? It's just going to immediately put them off even trying. So it's great to encourage all of that. But
I suspect many owners of small companies are looking to see what's going to happen and think, well, do you know what? I'm going to come to a point. I might exit this with a bit of entrepreneur's tax. That's been cut from 10 to 1. So am I going to step away from this? Is it actually worth it anymore? Maybe I want a bit of a rethink and a reset about how I move forward, because none of us really want to work to help support the government. Most of us have other key things in our lives that are a little bit more important. And if you go out and set out something by yourself, it's your own business, whether it's a limited company or self-employment, you're taking all the risks. And I find this conversation at the moment is insidious, this whole idea about we've got to equalise the tax rates. It's a thing Rishi has mentioned a couple of times. CGT should be brought in line, self-employed NI should be brought in line. No, it shouldn't, because we're taking greater risks, and there's no incentive for me to take a risk. I've got all the stress and hassle of a job with none of the legal protection. So you absolutely should make that more attractive to me if I'm self-employed or if I'm running my own limited company.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the government's got to recognise, the contribution that SMEs make to the GDP, which is approximately half, I believe. I don't know the exact number.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that potentially are the most flexible and have been the most flexible in this climate. I've been amazed to sort of see some of the responses that small businesses have had. They're sort of taking it on the chin. They're in the situation and thought, what can we do to keep our business alive and also sustain it for the future? And I think the government needs to recognise that and give these 5 million SMEs some sort of break in order to help put the economy back sooner. The big corporates don't respond that well. Your comment about the person earlier that sort of said, was it an aberration? People remote work. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's a massive benefit. It's going to cut overheads for businesses. They're not going to have the costs associated with having an office anymore. Pre-COVID, they thought staff needed to be in the building. They need to micromanage them. All these things that were a given pre-COVID. Now people are seeing, well, no, can actually work this business without people being in actually under a roof, or I need a smaller roof now because they don't need to be in all the time at the same time. So it's I think stuff like that, rate release, rent release, all those types of things that are potential to encourage businesses to grow and be better at what they do. That's you can't dismiss the 5 million SMEs or whatever the number is. It's around that number, I believe, in the UK.
No, absolutely. One of the things I've been thinking about the budget, there's still approximately 4 million people that are on furlough. That means they've been supported for 12 months, pretty much. Their salary's been paid by the government. The rumour is that he's going to announce the extension of that until the end of June to coincide with the roadmap. And I think, as much as this sounds quite harsh, I think that they shouldn't carry on extending that, but instead they should provide support to allow companies to pay redundancy pay. At the moment, redundancy pay is calculated on a week per year that somebody's worked there, and that can be quite an expensive bill to make. And we've got companies at the moment, this podcast, we've used the phrase kicking the can down the road constantly. And that's what we've seen. And with furlough in particular, we've seen those companies not have to make redundancies for people that probably they know they have to make redundancies for, but they don't have to because the government's going to pay them 80% of their wage. And if that carries on, then we're almost kind of artificially creating jobs when it perhaps might be a better option for the economy, as odd and perverse as this sounds, to make those people redundant so that they're free and able to go and set up new businesses, go and find other jobs that are actually of value and that exist. And there are businesses that are recruiting and busy. So I don't know what you guys, if you've got any opinion on that, of whether or not the furlough scheme should carry on and we should carry on supporting people until the end of the roadmap, or whether or not there should be an end to it.
No, again, we've got to bite that bullet at some point. So I don't see any reason for sustaining that per se. I think, that chances are that a lot of these people are still going to be made redundant at the end of it. So therefore, let's just bite that bullet. Let's eat that frog, I think is the expression from a business book out there. It's got to be done. Should we extend to June? I don't think so. I think we should just leave it as it is and see what happens.
And then Graham, what do you think?
Yeah, Brian Tracy, Eat the Frog, I think was the reference.
That's it. Yes,
yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Somebody said to me very early on in May, perhaps April, May last year, they'd said something about furlough. Essentially, was people who were redundant but didn't yet realise it. I sort of read that, and everybody else, I think it was on LinkedIn perhaps, and everybody else seemed to have already worked this out, or maybe they were just pretending. And I was quite happy to say, I hadn't really thought of it like that. But I think quite horrendously, that's probably true, at least for some people. And I'm pretty sure, wasn't the Arcadia Group had an enormous number of people on furlough last year? And I think, they had said previously, they are struggling. We know we're struggling. They've had buyers circling. They've had all sorts of issues going on. They've had previous scrapes in the previous 2, 3, 4 years. All of those large retail organisations, pretty much everybody could see there was an issue. I mean, you don't need to be an expert in that area. It comes back to that point earlier on. Do you want to buy off one of the big retail people just to deliver to you next day, or do you want to track into town and all the hassle of that? So I think, deeply uncomfortable though it is, just continuing to pay people to not do a job that isn't needed anymore, when you say it like that, doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Of course, some level of support's needed, and I know they're very keen to talk about how much they've, or how many extra people signed up for universal credit or something. And but again, that has all its issues as well. Probably you've got to look at some sort of redundancy support, as you said, Stephen. You've got to have something in place, because just to go, right, we're now going to close it is going to be Rishi and everybody's nightmare, because all of a sudden of those 4 million people, I don't know who suddenly are going to find themselves out of work. Because the other side to this, which is all quite uncomfortable but probably worth considering, is just as you were saying earlier on, Paul, as larger businesses have realised, do you know what? It's quite strange. We've employed adults, we've given them work to do, and even when they weren't sat in our special building and we were watching them, they still did the work. Who knew? So not only has large businesses realised that they don't need those big buildings, which means, of course, the landlords then have an issue, and all the support businesses around them, actually, we don't need them anymore. We don't need a 1,000-head building for 1,000 staff. We need a 200-head building because we'll go in one day a week. That makes a load more sense. Actually, there's a similar thing with, if I used to work with this many staff, but this many have been on furlough, and we were still largely able to operate, I'm really sorry to point this out, we didn't really need you.
Exactly.
And, for years and years and years, we've talked about UK productivity being way, way lower than, I don't know, loads of other people. And let's go back to this whole the 8-hour day. Well, the 8-hour day made sense when it was created, 150, 180 years ago. But why are we all productive for 8 hours? I've worked for myself for 25 years, and I have days when, frankly, I faff around for hours trying to get myself motivated. I have other days when in an hour I will blast through stuff. I have days when I work 12 hours. I have days when I work 3 hours. How is it possible that we all go into the office and we all do 8 hours and we all go home again? It's a nonsense. And I suspect all of this is going to take us back to, do all of those people who are currently on furlough need to go back to work? Horribly, unfortunately, probably no. So let's bite the bullet, figure out a redundancy package. I think that's a good idea, Stephen, and go from there.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea as well. But I came up with it, so there you go. No, part of the reason why I think it's a good idea is because there is a system in place where if a company goes bust, it goes into liquidation and cannot pay its redundancy payments, the government step in and pays the redundancy payments. And so we want to see a situation if you've got a company where you've got 10 people on redundancy out of 20 people, say, half of your staff are on furlough, and you're going to have to make them redundant. Well, those redundancy payments could be anywhere between, a couple of grand up to 20 grand. And so times by that number of people, that would be a potentially crippling sum for companies. And what you don't want to have is then a mass spate of administrations or liquidations just to try and avoid the redundancy payments, and then the company come and carry on trading but have sacked off a few members of staff. It seems to me to be much better, much more sensible for actually the government to go, do you know what, we're going to help support redundancy payments now. We're going to change the furlough scheme, help support it. You both touched on the final story already, but I'll ask it anyway. It's the head of Goldman Sachs, the bank, saying that working from home as a model was an aberration that needs to be corrected as soon as possible. And they are, as soon as they can, they want everybody bums on seats back in the office. Now, is that guy just a dinosaur? Is he not reading the room properly? Or is that like some places are still going to be like that? What do you think, Graham?
Let's cut to the chase, Stephen. The guy's Velociraptor. Solomon, isn't it? He, it's an aberration. Now, where he is right, they've got another new intake of staff. I think 3,000 interns last year who had no welcome to the office, welcome to the world, welcome to our ecosystem. In that, he's absolutely right. But that's as far as he goes right. Do we still need to get everybody together? Yes, we do. Do we still need to have meetings and events and reasons for teams to coordinate and collaborate in the same room? Yes. In those respects, he's absolutely correct. But you're right. He's reading the room totally incorrectly. It's not the word on the street, is it? You talk to 100 people, because I've asked this specific question on TikTok, and I had over 100 responses to it. I think 3, 4 said, I can't wait to go back to work. 30 or 40 said, I never want to go back to work. I love working from home. And 40 or 50 said, it's a bit awkward. I'd like to be able to go back sometimes. And nearly everyone said, I'd like to go back to the office once or twice a week. That's what pretty much everyone said. All of my clients are doing exactly the same thing. They are reducing rented space. They're keeping the big statement building that's in the center of the city, the one that they own. They're even thinking in some cases of turning that into a hotel or some other kind of building, but they're keeping those. All the hub offices, all of the outlets, all of those are going and being massively reduced. I think there's still something to be said for people that really struggle to work from home, perhaps for childcare reasons or where they live. But I still think that's a medium-term problem, because I don't know what it costs to put 1,000 people in an office in the centre of a city. I expect it's quite expensive. But if you only need 200, you've got a shed load of money every year spare. And some of that could go to some of your colleagues to work from home. And then you're saving money, they're happier, we've got a great deal more flexibility. So I think the guy is so out of touch with both popular sentiment and probably hardline commerce, would be my view.
Yeah. Paul, do you agree?
I agree with Graham. It needs to be a blend. It's all about managing people and making sure their productivity happens. You don't have to have a dictator standing over staff nowadays to get SH1T to happen. I think there are going to be opportunities when you do need to get the staff together. You do need a bit of team building. Maybe creativity is lost to an extent. That team feel you're going to lose when people join. Being inducted remotely is probably not much fun. So you still need that atmosphere. You still need that possibility. But yeah, it's a done deal now. I think I think most companies that aren't run by a dinosaur are going to see this as an opportunity. As I touched on earlier, they're going to reduce their office overhead costs. They'll probably move to more of a hot desking type situation, so it's not a fixed and firm desk or area you go into in an office. You just bring your laptop, you plug it in, and you're automatically connected to what you need to be connected to. And I think it's got to be the way forward. Definitely it's going to impact commercial property owners, I guess, but they'll need to look to repurpose their buildings, I guess. And I think there are already some people that are looking to make what are now sort of like larger corporate premises into more sort of serviced office, hot desking type things. They recognise that's what the need is going to be going forward. I think people do want to get out their house from time to time, particularly over the last year as it has been. But I think having that hot desk type thing would be fine. You don't need a set desk in a specific physical location anymore.
Oh, look, it's like the music industry. 20 years ago, the music industry was up in arms. They could not believe this whole new thing. Who was going to stream music? It's a ridiculous idea. People want to go and buy product. Well, it turns out, do you know what? I love my music and I love the fact I've got access to literally everything from my phone. It's amazing. It's brilliant. My 16-year-old sons cannot believe the struggle of having to walk half an hour to the train station, wait 20 minutes for the train, go into Birmingham for half an hour, walk across Birmingham for 20 minutes, go to Virgin Records and the same all in reverse to hear music for the first time that I hadn't actually heard previously, right? And guess what? The music industry is still moving on. I'm sure people within the music industry still say it's not perfect the way it's worked out, but What we tend to do is we get together for the big events. So the big events now are way more expensive than they used to be, obviously when we can all go back to them. And because they now are statement events, and you're right, we will get together for work when we need to. And so many, and it's the jokes about meetings, you know, you fed up with working, go and have a meeting instead. So all of those things, if we can do that online, brilliant. And then we get everybody together when it's the yearly conference, or when it's a bit of a collaboration because we need to put something together. That's the way it's going to go, and it becomes more important, perhaps more special because of that.
Excellent stuff, guys. Has there been any story that we've not talked about that you've seen this week that you thought that was fun, that was interesting, that you want to talk about? Graham, does anything pop into your head?
No, nothing whatsoever. I've been consumed with the stories about landlords, about the possible tax raises, and the ongoing discussion about what's going to happen post, pre, during the pandemic. So they've been the key stories for me that have been flying around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Paul, was there anything that you found novel or interesting?
Absolutely, Stephen. So at the risk of upsetting the LGBTQ plus community, and I know you've done podcasts before on gender inequality, and that's absolutely an important topic and area.
What's he going to say? What's he going to say?
Mr. Potato Head is to lose the Mr. title.
Yeah.
Toy maker Hasbro has decided to do that to promote gender equality. I'm not sure that does really. It's a traditional toy that's been around since the 50s. And, just by taking the Mr. off, I don't know whether some people are saying it's a bit of a PR stunt. I was thinking when I started to read it that it'd be great if a toy company did gender neutral toys anyway, and it looks like they do. So, the fact they're doing that, I think they've done enough. I don't think they need to sort of get away from something that I guess has been a traditional toy since the 50s.
I'm not sure if this is in the Toy Story film. It might be in another, offshoot series of that program. Has he split up with Mrs. Potato Head? Well, is that not a thing anymore?
No, apparently Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head still exist.
Right.
That's still a thing. They're just rebranding him as a standalone thing, just as Potato Head.
I actually think it's a good thing. All joking aside, I think it's a good thing because it normalizes stuff. And where when you normalize stuff, then it just kind of makes things easier for people that are actually struggling with that in their life. That's the reason behind it. I saw something similar. Oreo, the biscuits, they put out a tweet, and literally the tweet said "Trans lives matter," right? And that was the tweet. And so there was a lot of people going, "Great statement to make," but most of the comments were like, "You're only doing that for PR." Yeah, and that is always a really tricky thing, isn't it? So like Hasbro, they're doing something that they might have absolutely genuine and true intentions behind it, but it comes off and smells like PR. Then everyone goes, it didn't work. Graham, you must have seen that in your time of people bad PR being operated.
Well, I will share one thought with you that actually slightly side angle from what you were just saying, but I think linked. You mentioned earlier on that I use TikTok, and I only started using TikTok in June last year because I wanted to build a B2C community rather than a B2B community, and it's been very, very interesting. You learn a lot. I present a lot anyway on camera and all sorts. So I know how I look and how I sound and so on, but I wanted to do something with a different audience and see how it works. And of course, there's a new set of rules you've got to learn. And one of the things I only learned this week was, and I don't even know if this is true or not, I might have my leg pulled at this point, that there's a thing now that younger people use. Obviously, TikTok audience, a lot of it is quite young, where you deliberately misspell when you caption your work. And the reason you do that is because it makes people watch a little bit longer because they think, "Oh, you idiot, you've misspelled." And then various people will then feel compelled to tell you that you've spelled something incorrect. And I thought, a little bit like your PR example, is this something that is somebody trying to cover up the fact that they've done something really stupid and it's become a thing, or is it true? So I I decided to test it, and I'm quite allergic. Your and your is a classic one that people mix up, or there and there and there. People always mix that one up. So I mixed up something about don't let these people fool you, but I mixed up fool and fool, and I thought I'll give this a go, and I put the video out, and turns out they were right. About half of the responses I got were people pointing out what an idiot I was, the spelling incorrect, which I found fascinating, because now I'm wrestling back to your sort of PR idea. I'm trying to do something genuinely, or am I trying to do it for coverage? I find myself wrestling with, do I do another misspell, knowing it will increase my viewing figures, but knowing also it will grate and grind, particularly because most of my following is grown-ups in business as well. So it's an interesting thing. You can do something that gives you some attention, but maybe it's not the attention you want, but maybe that doesn't matter, because, and so it goes on.
Excellent stuff. If anyone wants to follow you on TikTok, Graham, how did they do that? 75,000 followers, I think you've got something like that.
Yeah, it's just 75,000 now. Yeah, it took a stop over Christmas, and then it's going up again now. Graham David, that's it. Graham David, Graham David, and there's a photo of me bellowing down a microphone, I think, on the graphic there. It's a lot of business mentoring type, very, very low touch, easy stuff I always describe it as normal business ideas for normal people like you and me. So it's not highfalutin, difficult stuff. It's normal stuff for normal people.
Perfect.
I might go on TikTok yet then.
Hey, Paul.
Absolutely. I think you should.
It's a high growth platform. It's worth it.
I'm still waiting for Clubhouse to come to Android, then I'll be happy.
Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming on the Business Herald podcast this week. I thoroughly enjoyed our chat. I hope you did as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Stephen.
Cheers.
And for everybody listening at home, thank you very much for tuning in. Do subscribe to the podcast on wherever you download your podcasts from. Leave a review, that would be great. And if there's anything that we've talked about that you have an opinion on, then do comment and let us know on social media. I'll put the links in the podcast notes so you can connect with all of us. But this show in particular is at the Business Herald on everywhere that you can social medialize. But once again, thanks very much for listening, and see you next week. Goodbye. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Stephen.
Good show.
We can say now, can we?
You can now, yes. Yeah. Two incredibly intelligent, successful people that can't find words and struggling for alternative words. It's one of those things, isn't it, where you just kind of get that word in your head and you go, I can't think of another word. What's the other word for that?
I think it's Billy Connolly actually pointed out that it's such a brilliant and emotive word sometimes, and you just want to off. And there's no way to explain the feeling and the belief and the emotion behind that particular phrase. So I'm with Billy on that.